Welcome to a tale where poetry wears a crown and emotions walk barefoot through the corridors of power. This is not the story of a ruler, it is the confession of a soul who learned that words can build empires, but love can build eternity. When a poet becomes a prince, every word turns to gold is not just a title. It is the living essence of Sheikh Hamdan, known to the world as Fazza, a man who has proven that a true prince rules not by command, but by compassion, not through authority, but through feeling. Before the crown, there was a boy who wrote verses beneath the Dubai sky. He was not yet the prince the world would later admire, he was simply a dreamer with sand between his fingers and starlight in his eyes. His heart was his pen, and the desert was his page. He wrote not for applause but for the echo of his own heartbeat, for the whispers of love that only the wind could hear. And in that sacred solitude, poetry became his destiny long before royalty did. As years passed, fate placed the weight of a nation upon his shoulders, yet he carried it with grace that only a poet could possess. While others saw power as privilege, he saw it as poetry in motion, a rhythm of duty, loyalty, and love for his people. He learned to balance two worlds, one where silence ruled in golden halls, and another where his words became the voice of those who could not speak. His heart spoke louder than his title ever could, and that made him a ruler of souls, not just lands. But somewhere between duty and dream, his heart stumbled upon love, a love so pure it made his poems tremble. She wasn't a princess, nor did she come from gold, yet she carried something far more precious, truth. She looked at him not as the Prince of Dubai, but as a man who wrote of sunsets and heartbreaks. In her presence, he forgot the weight of crowns. For the first time, he wasn't Fazza the royal poet, he was just a man trying to translate his heartbeat into words she could understand. Their story unfolded like a poem, delicate, forbidden, breathtaking. She inspired verses that made even the stars listen. Every glance became a stanza, every silence a sonnet. He realized that real poetry isn't written with ink, it's written with longing. And though their love lived in secrecy, it was enough to fill the vast emptiness of palaces. What they had could not be defined, only felt, and perhaps that's what made it eternal. But every poem has its tragedy. The day came when duty demanded his heart as payment for the honor he carried. He could write about love, but he could not live it freely. She became his muse and his memory, his forever muse in a world that demanded separation. When he walked away, it wasn't strength that guided him, but sacrifice. For what is a prince without his people? And what is a poet without his pain? He became both, a man who ruled by day and bled through poetry by night. His verses began to change after that. They were no longer about desire or beauty, they became confessions of an unspoken sorrow. Every line he wrote was dipped in truth and sealed with restraint. The world read his poetry and called it divine, unaware that each word was born from the ashes of what he couldn't keep. It was as if gold had melted into words, shining bright but burning deep. The poet in him became the healer of his own wounds, the prince in him their guardian. He learned that love doesn't die when it's lost, it becomes a light that never fades. His love became the reason behind his humility, the warmth in his leadership, the soul in his art. Those who met him saw kindness, those who read him felt infinity. For every poem he shared, he gave a piece of himself, a confession dressed as art, a truth hidden in rhythm. The man behind Fazza was not made of fame or fortune, but of feeling too vast to contain. Sometimes, late at night, he would walk alone through the royal gardens, where the air smelled of jasmine and memory. He would look at the moon and whisper the words he couldn't publish, the ones that belonged only to her. The moonlight would touch his face like a hand from the past, and in that moment, the prince would fade, leaving behind only the poet, the man who still loved in silence, even after time had stolen her away.
There were nights when the world slept under the calm of Dubai's stars, but he remained awake, lost between ink and memory. His pen became his companion, his silence a confession. The palace walls had long learned his rhythm, the soft scratching of a pen, the sigh between verses, the quiet tremor in his breath before he wrote her name only to erase it again. It was not fear that made him hide her identity, but reverence. He loved her too deeply to let the world turn her into a story. In his heart, she was not a chapter, she was the whole book written in invisible ink, meant to be felt, not read. Every time he stood before his people, his heart carried both pride and ache. The poet in him wanted to speak of her, the prince in him remained silent. And yet, through that silence, she lived. Every act of kindness he offered, every smile that melted hearts, every word that carried warmth, it all came from the love she left behind. She had taught him that strength is not in power, but in gentleness, that the loudest voice is not always the truest one. So, he led his people not as a ruler made of gold, but as a soul carved by love. Sometimes, he would return to the old paths they once walked together, where the sand still held the echoes of their laughter. He would close his eyes, and for a moment, the world would dissolve, the prince would fade, and only the poet would remain. In that silence, he felt her near, like a melody the wind refused to forget. It was as if the desert itself whispered her name, carrying it gently through the dunes, making sure he never truly lost her. To the world, it was just a breeze. To him, it was her voice calling him home. His poetry evolved as he did, from sorrow to gratitude, from longing to light. He began to understand that love never leaves, it transforms. The woman who once inspired his heartbreak now inspired his purpose. Her memory became the foundation of his compassion, her absence the reason he built bridges of hope for others. Through every verse he shared with the world, he healed a little more. His pain became the medicine for countless broken hearts, and his words became the gold that mended them. The beauty of Fazza's legacy was not that he wrote about love, it was that he lived it in silence. His poems were not crafted for fame or praise, but to keep his heart alive in a world that demanded restraint. Each time he wrote, it was an act of defiance against the idea that power cannot feel, that royalty cannot ache. He became the proof that a crown may weigh heavy, but a heart full of truth can still shine beneath it. Through